steps.
Okay. My name is Stuart Umpleby, and I'm going to chair this session on govern practical views from cybernetics systems and design. I'm very glad to be back to this DuPont Summit. Some of us have participated in these in the past, and they've always enjoyed them very much. And we've learned a lot from them. Okay, so of this panel is that it was a group of people who were meeting at George Washington of academic high-level government executives, and we decided to do a DuPont Summit. We've done some in the past, and this is a group of people who share an interest in government improvements and concerns about the system that has affected the United States in recent years. So our first speaker is going to be Robert Knisely. Over his 30 years in the federal government, he worked in 14 different places, including the Departments of Defense, Health, Education and Welfare, Housing and Urban Development, Commerce, Energy, Transportation, and Education. He will discuss the failures and successes of several federal programs, as well as what's needed to ensure that future governments are designed to succeed. And he has found the ideas in system science and cybernetics to be very helpful. What I'm going to do is to introduce the whole panel, and then we'll go take each panel in turn. So the second speaker will be Morris Bozen. He's also an experienced government administrator, has dealt at all levels of government. He defines governance as a broader term than administration. It focuses not only on doing something right, but also doing the right thing. He proposes an integrated approach that addresses three things: the need for adequate capability to accomplish a task, creating complex adaptive systems, and adopting a reflexive view to enhance self-awareness. Those three components are called requisite variety, complexity, and reflexivity. He will talk about that. And that expands the cognitive capacity of government. Then I will give the next presentation. I have a co-author, Tatiana Medvedeva, who's not in town. We were working on the notion that the rapid pace of social and economic change has led to many ideas about how organizations can change their structures and procedures. People in the fields of systems and cybernetics have been active contributors to this work with different points of view. They have defined a procedure for conducting a multidisciplinary conversation that combines theories and methods from several disciplines. This presentation will report on work that has been done with several government, business, and voluntary organizations. And then the next presentation would be about my Shell friend, who's a philosopher at GW. She's developed something called the policy compass or institutional compass, which is a three-dimensional way of looking at institutions where qualitative facts can each point toward harmony or away from harmony. The institutional compass tells us what quality direction actually dominates by applying a mathematical formula to a table of data. Policy focused on qualitative factors corrects or reinforces the direction the organization is going. Facts can be a mixture among economic, social, and environmental facts. And then the last presentation will be a co-presentation by Valerie Lamont and Lowell Christie. Lowell is from Western Maryland, I recall. Valerie comes to us from the state of Maine. So it's just good to have you with us. They're going to be proposing a conversation involving the Ukrainian diaspora and Ukrainians at home to define a path toward democracy. Ukrainian citizens would be involved in conversation on what democracy would look like for their country. The intent is to create a self-organizing civic education on rights and responsibilities of Ukrainian citizens. And the Montecristi have also been working on a national conversation on democracy as part of the America 250 celebrations. And they are working with the Rural News Network. So let's go then to these presentations, where our first speaker is Robert Nisley.
Thank you, Stuart. I should say that I will be giving the short form of this presentation. I have a longer form with 20 slides, which will be available online at my website, government-reform.info, soon, where you can dive as deeply into these issues as you like. And so this is a short form, only 8 slides. And I will quote only shortly from this one, which is from Thomas Jefferson, who said, "We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when a boy, as a civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors." He said that some time ago, and we're still trying to catch up with the way government should change. Pointed out by Madeleine Albright, who said, "People are speaking to their government with 21st century technology. We are listening with 20th century technology and responding with 19th century policy." And the last quote, which is even more relevant to how things work in the Congress, John Bradamus, who was in Congress for 20 years, said, "Congress never gets anything right the first time. After 5 or 6 years, we have to revisit our solutions and correct them." And I would point out one example of that, which I'm quite familiar with, which is one of unintended consequences. In 1968, I visited Faraday, Louisiana, while doing a site visit for the Office of Economic Opportunity. I learned that the officials there really liked the new food stamps program because it eliminated the jobs of the Black men who distributed food at the local warehouse. It created a few office jobs for white women reviewing and approving applications, and it stranded families who didn't have the small cash payment necessary for the food stamps, which of course then contributed to their migration to the north. And I'm quite sure this was not what Senators Hubert Humphrey and Estes Faber had in mind when they designed the food stamp program. Similarly, with counterintuitive results, during economic downturns, EDA at Commerce spent money on construction projects to alleviate recessions, which is a negative feedback loop. Often these took so long to get approvals that they got underway just in time to reinforce the next economic recovery, which is a positive feedback loop. We picked that up in 1976, and the program was modified to request and approve only shovel-ready projects. The program's counter-cyclical purpose was regained. To do that, we redesigned the program. Those examples now that are current would include pandemics, which we've all faced and we all know are coming again. What are we doing about it? The fragility of our worldwide ultra-efficient supply chains, and I think that's being tackled a number of ways. And we all also remember the problems with getting baby formula because those were single-sourced crucial projects. Going back to a problem which I'm not sure was considered, China's 35-year one-child policy has meant many more men in female infanticide, and now an aging population. How will they support it? And I will always wonder whether those issues were even thought about in 1980 before that policy went into play. Next, I taught several years this course at Johns Hopkins. I won't read these, but this is what the book's author, Lester Salomon, said were the tools of government. So there's obviously quite a bunch of changes, a bunch of possibilities and options for trying to get things done if you're in government. Next slide, please. And Solomon said, he went further in the book to what William Blake would call minute particulars. He examined each of the listed tools in terms of effectiveness, efficiency, equity, manageability, legitimacy, political feasibility, so forth. And then the key tool dimensions are also important in which tools to choose. One of the few times that in recent years that we've ever enlarged the government substantially was after 9/11. We established the review of people getting onto airplanes, which required hiring people in TSA. And usually the government does not expand these days. Usually it chooses from some of these other tools. Next slide, please. One of the things that I would argue for is modeled after the environmental impact statements, which are now required, that we have legislative impact statements for all proposed major congressional actions, which would provide the public and everybody with information not about what's proposed, but their congressional understanding of the problems underlying the proposed legislation. And any comments received would be a form of what's called crowdsourcing, getting the opinions of lots of people from around, people of interest from around the country. Next slide, please. So anytime that you're going to design government in the future, you really should be involving crowdsourcing, as I mentioned. And one of the things to look for is participatory budgeting on Wikipedia. We need to plan ahead for what can happen and not happen. And that scenario planning, there's also an excellent article on Wikipedia. Red teams are people within your organization whose job is to try to point out the weaknesses in what you're proposing to do. Red teams, again, are on Wikipedia. As I mentioned, legislative impact statements, I think, would be crucial. We don't presently have any organizations within government who are worried about the design of government and programs. So the legislative impact statements would help, although it's worth pointing out that there are more than 20 registered lobbyists in Washington for every congressman and senator. So there will be a lot of issues around any programs. So we need to look at those programs and what can happen, which leads to extensive and intensive project monitoring, one by one, and program evaluation overall. And I said this several years ago, it's a little snarky. Congress should pass a design, innovation, analysis, performance evaluation, and results act, which I would call the diaper act, which I will have to admit might not be a good sales technique for this bill. But the question of how to design government is no longer as simple as it might have been in the time of Thomas Jefferson. And we need to devote more time and attention to it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My briefing is going to be a shorter version of a longer handout that I have copies for if you all want them. It's also based on a book that came out in last September called Governance in the 21st Century. Let me give you the gist of this. First, we need to distinguish government from governance. When we think of government, we think of agencies, EPA or the Department of Transportation. Governance is the broader term relating to how people get together inside and outside of institutions to solve problems. The dilemma right now is that existential problems like climate change, food insecurity, wealth inequality are evolving exponentially while government agencies are evolving incrementally, if at all. They do not have the capacity, and this is a general statement, to deal with the complexities of the issues that are facing them. So what this book and what I am proposing is to broaden the cognitive capacity of governance. And when I'm saying cognitive capacity, I mean the ability for governance at any level to establish enough of a complex strategy to deal with the complexity of the issues that are being faced. So my solution is a three-part solution. The first is to whatever the governance body is, whether you're talking about a citizen assembly or the Department of Defense, they have to develop the ability to establish sufficient variety in their strategies to address the complexity of the issues that they're facing. And that's simply matching the complexity of the issue with a sufficiently complex approach to address those issues. The second part of the solution is to realize that government agencies alone can't solve the problem. They are part of complex adaptive systems. They are one actor of several actors that have to work together in order to develop the strategies that will address these issues. And the third part of the solution is reflexivity. Reflexivity simply means the ability for individuals or groups or agencies to question the lenses that they are using to view the problems. What is the overarching narrative that they're using, the story they're using, the myth they're using to understand the world around them? And of those three right now, I think that the hardest one for governing bodies to face is reflexivity. They are already attempting to establish strategies to match the complexity of the issues, and many of them are learning that they are only one of several actors in a system. It's much more difficult to do a self-examination of where you're coming from in order to see other possibilities. Okay, go on, keep going. Okay, let's start there. Let's start with requisite variety. I'm using three examples of agencies that I've done work with in the past: the Food and Drug Administration, the Bureau of Indian Education, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Three very different missions. This is an illustration of how each program has attempted to establish requisite variety to address the issues that they're doing. In the case of FDA, their challenge was, how do I establish sufficient number of protocols for drugs in order to regulate them effectively so that they minimize risk? Insufficient variety means that they had too few protocols going, and some important risk issues went left unattended. AIDS is a perfect example in the 1980s. On the other hand, if they have too much variety in their drug review processes, they can't possibly develop a different drug protocol for every different type of drug. So their challenge is to establish a balance between too few regulations and too many regulations. Too many regulations means they can't manage their own programs. Too few means they're going to get screams from people who are not their risk is not being addressed. In the case of Bureau of Indian Education, I go back to President Bush's No Child Left Behind. Some of you all may be familiar with that, where national standards were developed for education in the area of math and English. The Bureau of Indian Education was trying to establish meaningful educational standards for 500 different tribes. They tried the Bush route, which was to establish one standard for all 520 tribes. That did not work. But on the other hand, if they tried to tailor educational standards for each of the different 500 tribes, each of which operated under different conditions, they would never be able to manage their programs. So they had to establish requisite variety in order to address the educational needs of the tribes and still be able to manage their program. Okay, I don't think they've reached that balance. That's my personal opinion. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, another example of trying to establish requisite variety. If they tried to, their challenge is establish categories so that the right people are coming in, the wrong people are not coming in. Monolithic strategies such as building a wall or treating all immigrants the same does not address the immigration problem. On the other hand, if they attempted to tailor individual strategies for each individual category of immigrants, they'd never be able to, they would be managing even worse than they're managing now. So this is concrete example of agencies trying to establish a balance between too much and too little in their strategies, okay? Let's go on to, well, these are some examples of how you can expand your ability to establish requisite variety. You can form partnerships, economies of scale, transfer core competencies, prioritize, capitalize on artificial intelligence, et cetera. I don't want to go into detail, but it's in the slides that I pass out. Let's go on. Let's talk about complexity. Complexity is the second component. Agencies and anybody who's trying to govern have to realize they're part of a very complex set of people, circumstances, events, et cetera. And these complex systems often self-organize, they adapt, solutions emerge. But however these complex organizations or complex systems behave, it's not the same as traditional hierarchical approaches to government, okay? So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is an example for immigration. All of these circles around the border are representative of all the different interests that are attempting to manage the immigration solution. Unless you adopt a collective systems approach to understanding all this, you're not going to solve the immigration problem. Let's go on to the next slide. The leadership roles are very non-traditional in the area of trying to be part of a complex adaptive system. Rather than being top down, you have to, if you look at the right-hand column, these are different kinds of leadership roles in a complex system. You provide space to innovate. You may have to provide guardrails. You have to balance connectivity and resilience within a complex adaptive system. Too much connectivity means less ability to adapt to change. You have to be able to share information among the entities, in the agents in a complex adaptive system. You have to be able to expand the scope and scale of problems that are facing you, and not just at a local or a regional or national or global level. You have to understand the relationships, and you have to be able to balance what in complexity terms are path dependencies with achievable fitness peaks. All that means is that you have to be able to know when people can be able to let go of traditional ways to solve problems and discover new ways that are within their grasp. So these are all changing leadership roles that need to work, that don't work in a hierarchical situation. Let's go on. Keep going. Okay, another aspect of complex adaptive systems is that you have to understand the system's nature of what you're dealing with. This is a causal loop diagram that is drawn to show that there are feedback loops to everything that you do. The two circles on the right represent two examples in the area of immigration where a negative feedback loop stabilizes situations. In that top case, we're talking about developing immigration technology that temporarily stops the flow of illegal immigrants. And when the flow stops, the funding for the technologies goes down and more illegal immigrants grow in. So it's a stable loop, but it's not stable in the right direction. In the bottom section is an example of a positive feedback loop, which is a good positive feedback loop because it's bringing more H-1B visas entrance into the country, which is good for them and good for our economy. But the larger point is that to really understand the operations of a complex adaptive system, in this case, immigration, you have to understand all of the relationships, how they affect each other, and which ones are going out of control and which ones are in control. Okay, let's go to the next one. Reflexivity, the last one. This refers to people. This is the hardest one, where people have to reflect on what they're doing. And I have two examples here. Next one. Next one. Next one. Okay, so I use this example of reflexivity in FDA. My experience of FDA, every once in a while we had retreats with the executives who took some time out to examine, okay, who are we? What are we really? Are we policemen? Are we educators? Are we scientists? Do we operate as a machine? Do we operate as a an animal, a living organism. In other words, we took 2 or 3 days to go back and look at the lenses that we were looking at in order to be able to see other possible ways of viewing our job. This is a reflexive look. Unfortunately, the retreats were only 2 days, and after 2 days, most of the people went back and reverted to the metaphors that they were using to view the world. So the challenge is, how do you, short of going to a 2-day retreat, how do you get people to permanently re-examine the lenses that they use to review the world? That's why I say this is the hardest thing. One more. This is an example of reflexivity in the area of customs and border protection. The circles represent 3 different ways of looking at the border. The dark green in the center is looking at the border simply as a physical barrier. The lighter green middle circle is, how do you look at the border in terms of securing the border? But the lighter green one, which really forces people to take off their lens and look at the border management from a broader perspective, which they haven't done yet, is that there are many functions having to do with border management, including sharing creative ideas across the border, exchanging resources, adapting to changes. The problem with U.S. Customs and Border Protection is they're stuck on the first 2 circles, and they're not able to remove their lenses in order to see other ways that you can look at boundary management. It's not border management, it's boundary management, which is a much more comprehensive way of looking at the relationship between you and your environment. One more slide. No, keep going. Okay, I'll end with this. The major challenges to implement in this integrated governance is, 1, willingness to cede power and influence to a network of stakeholders, which is, it's a hard task to do. Acknowledging the effectiveness of collective intelligence is what happens in a complex system where you're engaging more resources than just a single agency. Recognizing the importance of interaction, information sharing, willingness and ability to authentically examine the lenses through which we all make sense of and simplify the world around us, and then willingness to deconstruct these views. That's the toughest challenge of all. And if you want fuller versions, I have them here. Michelle?
Thank you. Could I have the slides, please, for mine? All right, so we're going to shift gear a little bit. And I want to talk about something which I call a institutional compass. An institution is any sort of organization that has some rules. And the compass, that's right, thank you. And I want to talk about governments for harmony. Now, I happen to have chosen harmony. I don't have to, but let's move to the next slide, please. So what do I mean by harmony in the economy? Harmony in the economy means more or less steady state. It's all the stuff that just happens and ticks over. So I'd like the second slide, please. Number 2. That's the one. Thank you. So harmony in the economy just means steady state economy, right? So things are not, we don't have growth, we don't have degrowth. What do we mean by harmony in society? Well, society we measure in terms of health, in terms of security, and in terms of education and culture. So harmony in society in terms of health means that you have a healthy population, things are not changing too much, healthy families, good families, basic education is strong. Yeah, it's all sort of ticking over in a very harmonious way. What do I mean by harmony in the environment? I mean that it's steady state. We don't have ecosystem collapsing. We don't have big changes in the environment, that it's all going through the normal cycles that the scientists know about. We talk about ecosystem health. So the ecosystem is in a healthy state, and there are indicators to tell us whether or not an ecosystem is healthy. I want to contrast harmony now to discipline and excitement. Discipline is when things are dark, They're difficult. There are rules, there are challenges, there are boundaries. We all need self-discipline in order to get ahead. We all have to learn some self-discipline. Institutions need some discipline. They need some rules. They need some boundaries. And there's a dark side, right? And these are the reason why we have the rules is because there is death, there is disease, there are difficulties, there is ecosystem collapse, and we should face this. And then the third quality I want to talk about is excitement. This is when things are on the move, when it's very bling bling, when there's lots of colors, when there's lots of sparkly, when we don't know, when there's in the economy, there's risk, right? We make an investment, that's risky. When we talk, hold on. When we talk about society, well, we have, festivals and there's superstars and things are on the move. When we talk about the environment, we're talking about the imposition of man on nature, trying to control nature. So this is risky when we do it, but sometimes we want to do it in order to better nature in some sense. So we have three general qualities. They're not good, bad, indifferent. You might prefer one to another. I'm selecting harmony for the sake of this talk, but you might want to select one of the other ones. They are represented as compass points. A compass is a circle. The circle has 3 points: harmony, discipline, and excitement. Next slide, please. So to live sustainably, there's long arguments in favor of this. To live sustainably, we should move in the direction of harmony. So we represent this as a reading on what I call an institutional compass. So this is what we might call the desired reading, where I want to go as a government, as an institution. Next slide, please. Say a region is actually heading in the direction of discipline. That means that there's social unrest, there might be warfare, or a revolution going on. In terms of the environment, we're talking about ecosystem collapse. In terms of the economy, we're talking about an economic crisis.
This meeting is being recorded.
Each region will have its own compass direction. So some areas will be going in the direction of discipline, other regions will be going in the direction of harmony, other ones will be going in the direction of excitement. A regional compass's actual direction represents a table of economic, social, and environmental data for the region. So that arrow reading is a way of adding up. I use a mathematical formula to go through the whole table of data, which includes economic, social, and environmental data. I apply a mathematical formula, and you get an overall reading. Stakeholders in the region are invited to add and sometimes analyze the data points. So specialists might miss some data points. We can always add more because the mathematical formula normalizes and corrects for if you add more data. So you still get an overall reading. So we can watch the compass change its direction by adding more compass points, and each compass point will have a length and a direction. Next slide, please. So the compass direction is a holistic representation of a table of data. Each data point has its own length and its degree on the circle. To change the direction of the final reading, so say a policymaker, decision maker doesn't like the direction, then you go back to the table. You find the data points that head towards harmony in this case. This is, again, the one that I chose for the sake of this presentation. And we use policy to increase their length, that is their impact on the final reading. We find the data points that head in the opposite direction, in the opposite to harmony, the ones that are described as chaotic, dangerously destabilizing, high risk, etc. That is the edge between excitement and discipline. Use policy to discourage these. Policy, when it's successful, rotates, lengthens, or shortens the direction of a region's compass reading, bringing it in the direction of harmony if that's the desired direction. Next slide, please. Last slide. So now how do we take responsibility, and how do we check that the policy is actually successful or not successful? I introduce a new unit, call it the CUMPA. I just came up with that word a few months ago. We can change it. It's not in the public domain yet. So it's a new unit. It measures on a standard size of compass, right? So make it 1 yard in diameter. And it measures the distance between the actual compass reading and the desired compass reading. So it can be in inches, it can be in centimeters. I don't mind. A policymaker then says, I'm going to, through looking at the data and targeting the right sort of data, and the ones that the pieces of data that over which I have some influence, I'm committed to reducing that CUMPA by 3 inches in 3 years, say. And if they don't, then there's something that's gone wrong. Now, it might be for external reasons, in which case they have a story to tell, but it might be that their policy has not been successful in targeting the data points that they said that they would target. And then they have failed in their responsibilities. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So we have Valerie and Lowell.
No. Okay. I will be talking about some very specific examples, excuse me, at the community level primarily, of the kinds of thinking, tools, methodologies that you've been hearing around the table this morning. Before I do that, though, I want to provide a little bit of context here. The individuals that have come together for this particular presentation are actually part of a larger organization, and we call ourselves the Forum on Democracy. Excuse me, losing my voice here. The Forum on Democracy is actually a 501c3 nonprofit. We are nonpartisan, and the organization is entirely volunteer. I wanted to share that with you, and also the purpose of what the forum is all about. We are looking to rediscover, rethink, reimagine, and rebuild the American experiment, rediscovering our roots back to the American experiment, thinking about where we are now, reimagining where we might want to go, and then rebuilding that American experiment. The types of things that we focus on in this process, et cetera, are really citizens in conversation in order to initiate change. As a vehicle for carrying this out, we also have a website. Now, that website is in process. We have not built it out, but we are working on strategies to provide funding in order to build it out. But that website, another word for it is portal, is really the vehicle that we are using to set the stage for a systemic change. The website is intended to be a very information-rich environment. It is intended as a learning environment, very interactive, and highly, highly networked. So with that, I'm going to give you a few examples of what we're doing at the community level. Next, please. Okay, setting the context for this. Part of our focus is really on America 250. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, this is the celebration in 2026 of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Across the country, states are forming commissions right now in order to create those celebrations, some of which are starting right now, but building up to 2026. So we're using that event to talk about our intent. And our intent by 2026 is actually to have a national conversation on democracy. In order to do that national conversation, we are starting at the local level with community organizations. Could I have the next one, please? Yes, thank you. Community organizations. And the best example that we have right now is something called a partnership with the Rural News Network. This is a network of about 1,700 newspapers across the country. Local newspapers, very small newspapers, and obviously very small community based. Excuse me, what we are going to be rolling out literally within the next 2 weeks is the following. We are doing a trial run with 17, a chain of 17 newspapers in upstate New York and parts of New Jersey. And the notion here is to present a question in that newspaper. That question is going to be, what does the American mean to you today? And the intent is to have people in those 17 communities respond to that question. And they'll be responding to it with essays, with poetry, with music, with art, whatever vehicle they decide they want to use. What will happen next is that the responses will be linked to our website. They'll be accumulated, and we'll be able to provide feedback to each one of those 17 newspapers about the responses, and also taking the time to begin to analyze those responses. We'll have a little bit of background information on the individuals, et cetera. So we'll be able to say, okay, here's how words are clustering. Here's a difference between people with respect to age groups, et cetera. Not terribly sophisticated, but it gives us an idea of what is happening, how people are responding. The other part on this is the feedback. This becomes very important because the individuals and the newspapers will have an opportunity to see feedback from other people in the community, but also compare that feedback, if they so desire, with other communities too. Again, this is a trial run, and it will be starting in the next 2 weeks. So we're getting very excited about this. But as you can imagine, at the local level, giving an opportunity to people with a very simple question: what does the American dream mean to you? Which, by the way, was vetted by newspaper owners and publishers. But that question also will be the first in a series of questions over the next 2 years. Those questions will take the nature of, what does citizenship mean to you, just for example? What kind of a future are you thinking about as a legacy, to the next generation? So we're quite excited about that. It's ready to go. The next, could I have the next, please? Thank you. The other types of, activities we're involved in all involve conversations at the community level. For example, Maine, I am taking a different approach there. I am working with a group of nonprofit organizations who are going to take these conversations first to their membership, and then take the next step, inviting people from other parts of from the rest of the community to participate in those conversations. But these partnership organizations become very important, because not only do they know how to do the research and how to organize conversations, they become very important also to us in terms of how they think about these conversations and taking the next step. Not just conversations, but how can these conversations catalyze change? Another example, Chattanooga, that is simply in process right now, but we are working with an individual in Chattanooga who is going to take their earlier 1980s conversation and bring it up to date, because there are some changes, obviously, and the focus is going to go away from economic development, which Chattanooga has been very successful with, and focus more on the different kind of a city that they want to design for. And so just a listing here. But the next project is really in the discussion stage, although there is a paper on this. It's called A Modest Proposal. This is another conversation, but obviously it's international. The notion for this particular idea, which I'll describe in just a moment, actually came from a conversation that I had with one of our senators, Senator Angus King, about a year ago when the Ukrainian war was just starting. And I was pointing out some of the parallels between that war and what we were going through in our American Revolution. He became quite interested in that and asked for a little bit more detail, a 2-pager. Well, now we have just delivered a 20-pager to him, which talks about a Ukrainian conversation on democracy, a Ukrainian conversation that would involve people in the Ukrainian diaspora, 6 million people who are scattered throughout Europe, looking to return home, people within Ukraine, people within the United States who are also refugees here or have a Ukrainian heritage. The whole notion would be this conversation on their future. What do they want their democracy to look like? This is not a governmental effort. It is about the people of Ukraine and how they want to move forward with their type of government, their unique take on democracy. So right now we are sharing this in draft form with a number of organizations as well as individuals like Senator King, et cetera, to get some feedback and then to take it to the next level. So this is a biggie if this takes place. The other thing I want to point out is that this actually would take place now while the Ukrainians are still fighting for their future. But what better time for the Ukrainians to think about their future than right now when they're in the midst of such travail. So with that, I will turn this over to Lowell Christie next, but I think you can see that what is a thread that runs through all of these different activities that we're talking about is really changing the system. How and why. Lowell?
Thank you, Valerie. Change the system, how and why. What we're talking about is how do you think about a living system, not a mechanical system? And the whole theme is it's not bigger government, smaller government, it's better governance. And that gets out of the government trap of saying it's about the people that Valerie was talking about. Guess what? Citizens. And that's the fourth branch of governing that has been forgotten as we do the media parade on the newspaper, who's going to win the horse race. So what we're talking about is thinking differently, cybernetic systems and design. You've heard some of the flavors about that here. We're moving beyond revolutions against power because freedom is never enough. It's to transformation of how you see the world and interact with the world that Butch was talking about. How do I interact with the environment? Michelle was talking about, how do I think about the world and how am I engaged in relation to it? And also it's about the metamorphosis of the paradigm shift. And that's the words that we heard all the time around here, which is how do you change the system? So I have ultimately 2 core slides, but I'll just give the next slide. Linear strategies and lineal. Lineal is cause and effect thinking in a curved universe. And of course it says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. Next slide. When policy is not fit for function. Now think about it, is not fit for function that it's supposed to be doing now. And so what we're looking at is our filters did not see that. In all 3 events, 9/11, our Kabul exit, and the Chinese balloon, I found that exact phrase in the news coverage. Our filters were not affected by what was coming at us that we didn't see. We were blindsided. So, and this quote by Eric Hoffer, longshoreman, philosopher, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Next slide. Okay, what's important here is the difference of distinctions of a different paradigm. And that's what we're talking about here. So on one side, you have to have them both. That's the coupling. It's control in a living system. But look at that curious thing about efficiency and health. Now, this goes against common sense. You increase efficiency unless you're Norfolk Southern and you lobby the Trump administration that you can get a 1.5-mile train and keep it safely. And East Palestine, Ohio is now suffering from that sort of thinking. So it's a matter of a balance here of control, purpose, mission, but that blinds you. And what you have to do is see about there. So look at the contrast between a power over state-based empowerment of by for the nation. We're talking about a nation here. A nation is a conversation between the living, the dead, and the unborn, according to Edmund Burke. So linear, unidirectional progress versus a circuit, recursive, what Butch was talking about there, identity. No one in government talks about the identity of those people they're interacting with. That has to be on your compass. Well, looking at attention, eye candy versus awareness of your situation. I'm going to seduce you. No, it's a matter of what's happening here. The walled ignore the environment versus outposts of environmental learning. It has to be experimental outposts, not a comprehensive solution. A book of answers versus levels of learning, positive, negative feedback that was talked about. Authoritarian, out of one, many, out of me, everyone, king, or in our thing, out of the many, one, the union of the thing. And so you look at the analog, holistic, evolutionary versus the digital Boolean algebra that we have out here now, the ecological versus analytic, reductive of natural science. Okay, next slide. This will be my last slide. This is from Douglas Engelbart, the inventor of the hypertext, all the ideas of mice and windows, etc. And he taught me this. You need to journey to the heart of complexity. And what's the heart of complexity? Look at this lower triangle. This is the world as it is in your institution. You have the A level, the Army, the applied, the front lines, and they can innovate a little there. Then you have the improvement cycle. Oh, I'm a university, I'm a contractor, I'm a defense thing, but they're all within a defense military complex or a health industrial complex that does not allow to see the consequences to the environment. So the observations of the environment via NIC, the one word I want you to take away is network improvement community. That's citizens. So you have this is ABCs. The C level is the model of the environment that you have, and you're testing that at all time versus saying it's a truth. It's a super framework where you did deduction on this side, induction going up here, but the abduction, which comes from Pierce and others, which is metaphors, analogs, narratives, things that we can't put into a database. So always think about that C level of the observation of the environment. And this goes back to my last point, is the founders of this country saw this as a sacred activity. They based their sacred honor on a Declaration of Independence. And it was a kind of divinity. It wasn't a God religion thing, but it was like, we're creating a living whole. We're creating something that's alive, and it will die unless we have everyone, the diversity, et cetera, do that. So I have a whole presentation, that supports all that type stuff, but this is the short form.
Good, excellent, okay.
How's our timing?
Timing is perfect. What, 15 minutes now, or 10 minutes for a discussion of all of this. Who wants to go first? Yes.
Sure. I have a general question, perhaps for people who've been in the government. Is that in my youth, I heard about, we're networked, right? Hi, I'm Rich Talbot. So I had a question that be focused more on the people with government experience. But when I was growing up, I learned about the 3 branches of government. And then one day somebody introduced the 4th branch of government, which is our press corps. And they haven't been talking about the press corps so much in the last decade or two. Okay, maybe they haven't earned the title of the 4th branch. But now I hear about a 5th branch, and it's the administrative aspects of the government. And so I understand that there is tremendous connectivity between the administrative processes going into the different branches and making things more efficient. I was wondering if somebody could talk to that administrative branch and explain it to me.
Hi, this is Bob Nicely again. I was one of the 3 civil servants who was taken in to see Al Gore about starting the National Performance Review, where we talked about making government work better and cost less. And that went on for a while. It turns out that that was one of a double handful of 20th century reinvention efforts under different names. And the issues still remain, and they always will, because, for instance, reflexivity, if you're working in government and you'd like to have things change out around the civilization, you have a perspective on what people will do and won't do and how they're incentivized, or what you need to do for control. For example, just to throw out another number, during Prohibition, Al Capone had 32,000 speakeasies in New York City alone. And the number of agents in the federal government who were supposed to close down speakeasies across the country, I think never got over either 1,500 or 5,000, some smaller number. You can't get that from here, as we say in Boston. So the question of how you design the administrative state in a way to be efficient and effective is something which will be with us continuing forever. I think that there was also, I'll throw in, an interesting observation by a professor in Canada who pointed out that the relationship between citizens and the government is not one of just the customer in terms of make government work better and cost less. He pointed out that there are 4 roles. So there are the customer, the citizen, the client, in terms of an ongoing relationship, unlike customer where you're buying and selling something, and last, the subject. So you have to keep those 4 roles in mind when you're talking about what government is trying to do with 4 and 2 people. And good luck on making the administrative state ultimately successful. You can choose a tool of government which requires less administration versus ones that require more administration. And that's not always tempting. If you're in the government, you want to make sure it happens. But, excuse me, for example, I'll be in trouble here. I think that if you want to cut down on gun deaths in the United States, you need to raise taxes on bullets. At the present time, we have a tax on bullets, so it's constitutional, but it all goes for wildlife preservation, not people preservation. But if you put a tax on bullets, then you can collect that as the government wherever they're sold. You don't have to be trying to run around and ask people how many bullets they have and blah, blah, blah. So it's a much more administratively efficient solution. I yield the floor. Well, what I would do, I would probably look at the costs of gun deaths and injuries and then try to make some sort of run at what that should be against the price of bullets, and then go from there in terms of a public discussion. That doesn't come out to an absolute price, but if you look, a lot of guns are suicide, a lot of them are quote urban, close quote. At some point, obviously the people with a whole raft of guns can probably afford a raft of bullets, but I think that you would cut back substantially on deaths overall if we raised the price of bullets. And that would be an efficient, effective administrative tool of government.
So I've been teaching American government politics 101 off and on for 28 years or so. But I always thought that 4th branch of government was also the media, journalism. I mean, I thought that Jefferson also promoted the idea it was important for information to get to the citizens because the citizens really cannot be active and activate anything unless they get information. And I think Jefferson appropriately understood that, then you have these people that work full time sticking their nose into the business of, the legislative, the, judicial and the administrative, branches. And so this idea of the fourth, fifth, sixth branch of government, where does journalism and so on fit in, especially when you have citizens that are busy? Because also Jefferson recognized that the yeoman farmer was busy working and tilling his soil, or the citizen today is busy making a living. So but they need information. So I was wondering if you could answer that. Thank you.
Just a quick reaction to that. I think, although it's not a fourth branch of government, I think to not only give citizens information, but to make them more critical thinking, it has to start with our education system, and at a very early age. So turning consumers into citizens by giving them more information is one step and could be considered the fourth branch, facilitated by the media. But even before that, teaching critical thinking skills, teaching courses like civics, not just to learn what the branches of government are, but how to keep an open mind, how to process information, and how to pay attention to the lenses, as I said earlier, that people use to process that information. So to me, it's a long and sporty course to get to the point where the relationship between citizens and the information they get can be really productive.
One of the people that works with us is Terry Anderson, who decided to vacation for 7.5 years as a hostage in the Middle East. And so he understands the role of journalism. And he's really seen the need for journalism to change from the horse race coverage, because media now has become a media channel, a spindle for ideology. And what we're trying to do, what Valerie was speaking about, was a medium of communication, a medium. Remember good old Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. The medium is a two-way interactive thing versus a one-way propagandistic channels. So that's what we're trying to create, are those interactive and get the conversations going amongst citizens. Because the one thing that I think is missing in what you're saying about, and what everyone talks about, the journalism in Jefferson, but it's this agency of the citizen for self-governing, solving problems at the lowest possible level. So that means there has to be a very unique use of the word citizen, which is, I can see things that you in your power paradigm, you in your silo do not see. Quick example, Little Falls, Minnesota, center of the opiate problems in 2014 or so. The woman of the foundation grew up on a farm, understood systems, etc. Was down in the luncheon talking to me. Well, we have to get about 8 more new emergency physicians because we raise the dead. We give them Norcam. They come back and they go out and then they come back in dead. We raise them again. And she said, "This is stupid." And so she went to the police and said, "Well, we do our job. We arrest them. Judge, we put them in prison. Prison guards, we keep them there till they are allowed to." Everyone was doing their job. They were over professionalized. She got everyone together and had the policeman, because guess what's on the prescription? The doctor's name. You go into that thing and slam it down on the table and say, "What the heck are you doing?" And so they were able to get the pharmacists, the Indian tribes, everyone working together to solve the problem at the lowest possible level. And that's self-governance that's been forgotten in every one of our media campaigns of, we need more money for journalism. Yeah, we need it for local journalism, but for how to see the system. How do I see results? Pardon? And they produce results. In this one case in Little Falls, from 2014 to 2018, they reduced the prescription rate in one county by 40,000 prescriptions a month, because they were selling these things. It was very profitable.
I'd like to also comment a bit on your question too, because you're also talking about time. People work, they have other kind of obligations, and what kind of time do they have? Not just to participate, but to access information, to go look for information that can be relevant to what they're doing. I would say this, I think you're absolutely right on that point, but at the same time, I see some counter, excuse me, activity going on across the country. People are recognizing that, yes, something is wrong. For a couple of years, they have not been able to put their finger on it, but they have had that feeling something is wrong out there. Something is wrong with the system. Our institutions are not responding to our needs. They won't even, my congressman won't even talk to me, even though I want to, go up there and have conversation with them, et cetera. There are too many layers, et cetera. So people are recognizing that. And it's manifesting in different ways. There are a lot of very local organizations forming around issues, and they're bringing in people at the same time. I find that to be a very positive way of, positive route that is taking place. I'm not going to suggest that it's going to change everything and that all these groups, et cetera, are going to have that impact on changing the entire system, but it's a step in the right direction. I think it becomes very important because now that whole notion of something is wrong is being impacted, or people are being impacted by something is wrong in many different ways. Our institutions simply are not able to respond to complex social issues, whether it's Afghanistan, Vietnam, or lead in the water in your local community. So there is this feeling of we need to do something, we're not quite sure where to go. But I will also mention something else that's happening in Europe in particular. There's something called citizen assemblies. I don't know if you've heard about them or not. Michelle actually is going to take part in organizing one in France. But there's been a little bit of a history here. And again, it focuses on citizen participation in particular. And what is happening is the following. It's not participation in terms of what we're talking about, broad-based conversation for the Ukrainians, but groups of people are being selected in countries to be representative of the population and being selected to participate in conversations on issues. This was really demonstrated in Ireland, where they had the major vote on abortion. Those citizen conversations had an impact on how that vote turned out. So these were not idle conversations and people getting together for the sake of getting together. So anyway, just wanted to mention that too.
Okay.
I think we're out of time, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, but Michelle's doing the citizen assembly. Talk to her afterwards. We're all available. We have a lot of materials. So if you want to know more about what we're up to.
Thanks to all of you for coming. We hope we can continue online with email and so forth, and maybe next year.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Pass the